The air on Velkaris was thick with the smell of dust and the heavy weight of battle. The planet had been torn apart by war, its once beautiful skies now streaked with the smoke of burning cities. The ground was scarred, cracked by explosions, and covered in ruins from ancient structures that had once stood proud. In the middle of this chaos, Tommel moved carefully, his boots making no sound on the crumbled stone beneath him. As a scout for the Earth forces, his job was simple: gather intel, report back, and stay alive. But today, as he made his way through a deserted market square, he felt a strange sense of unease. He had been on Velkaris for weeks, but the tension in the air seemed different now. Tommel paused, squinting through the smoke. He heard a faint cry. His sharp instincts kicked in, and he turned toward the sound. He knew better than to trust the silence of a war zone, but something in that cry, desperate, weak, pulled at him. He jogged towards the noise, moving through the wreckage of a building. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a figure lying motionless on the ground. A Zerellan. His heart skipped a beat. Zerellans weren't supposed to be out here, not after the war had raged for years. They were a proud and cold species, and Earth's alliance with them had been strained at best. Yet here one was, injured and alone. Tommel's first instinct was to walk away. It was safer. Zerellans were often hostile toward humans, and helping one wasn't part of his mission. But something stopped him. He knelt beside the woman who was barely conscious. Her skin was a pale blue, and her long silver hair lay tangled around her face. She wore the markings of a high-ranking officer, her armor scratched and battered, but still recognizable. "Hey," Tommel whispered gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment there was nothing but confusion in them. Then, slowly, the recognition settled in. She was Zerellan, but her gaze was more human. There was an understanding there, as if she had seen something in him that most others of her kind wouldn't. She gasped, her voice weak. "I need help." Tommel's heart clenched. He could leave her here, return to his mission, but he couldn't. Not with her pleading like that, not with the fear in her eyes. He had to help her. Carefully, he helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she leaned against him. Her breath was ragged, and her body trembled from the pain. He looked around, spotting a small ruined building nearby. It wasn't safe out in the open, especially with enemy forces lurking. He had to get her to shelter. With slow, careful steps, Tommel guided the Zerellan woman toward the ruined structure, his mind racing. He wasn't supposed to do this. He had his orders, but there was something about her, something in the way she held herself even now, that made him pause and wonder. Inside the building, Tommel found a small corner where they could sit. He ripped a strip from his own shirt and used it to bind her wound. She didn't speak at first, but her gaze never left him. She watched him with an intensity that unnerved him, but also made him feel something else. He couldn't place it, but he felt it all the same. "My name is Tommel," he said, trying to break the silence. He didn't expect her to answer, but she did. "Reva," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I owe you my life." Tommel felt a strange warmth spread through him at her words. He had only done what anyone would do: help another living being. But the way she looked at him, the way her eyes softened, he knew she wasn't just thanking him for helping her. There was something more, something deeper. "I didn't expect to find anyone here," Tommel said, shifting slightly. "What happened to you?" Reva hesitated, her eyes flicking to the outside world, as if trying to decide how much to reveal. "I was separated from my squad. We were attacked by a rebel faction. I was left behind." "Alone?" Tommel asked, his voice gentle. Yes, she replied, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed her pain. Tommel stayed with her until the skies darkened. They spoke little, but their shared silence was enough. He had saved her life, but in that small moment, it felt as if something else was happening, something unspoken. Neither of them fully understood it yet, but it would change everything. On Earth, life was simple for Tommel. After the war ended, he had chosen to leave the chaos behind. He found peace in the quiet farming colony on the southern continent, far from the military bases and the turmoil of intergalactic politics. The fields stretched out before him like a vast green sea. He had always found comfort in the steady rhythm of farming, the planting, the harvesting, the quiet moments alone with the earth. It wasn't an exciting life. There were no grand battles to fight or important missions to complete. But for Tommel, it was enough. He had a small house on the edge of the colony, surrounded by crops and a few animals. He worked hard every day, his hands rough from the labor, but his heart lighter than it had been during the war. Earth, in all its peaceful simplicity, had become his sanctuary. Yet there were days when the past crept back into his mind, uninvited. Those days were hard. He would be working in the fields, the sun high in the sky, when suddenly the memory of Raiva would appear, sharp and clear as if it had just happened yesterday. He would see her face, the way she looked at him that day on Velkaris, vulnerable, yet strong. He would hear her voice, soft and unsure, as she whispered her thanks. For months, Tommel tried to forget. He buried his thoughts about her, convinced that it was just a fleeting moment in a war-torn galaxy. After all, how could someone like Raiva, so far from his world, so different from him, ever be anything more than a memory? But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He had cared for her in a way that went beyond a simple act of kindness. There was something about her, her quiet strength, her intelligence, the way she never backed down, that had left a mark on him. It wasn't just the way she had looked at him when he helped her that day, but the way she had held herself in those final moments before her people had arrived to take her away. There had been something more than just gratitude in her eyes. Tommel had never told anyone about her. He had kept the memory to himself, tucked away in the corners of his mind where it could remain safe. Talking about Raiva to anyone else would have felt like sharing a secret that wasn't his to share. But even though he had moved on with his life, even though he had found peace in the quiet of the fields, there was a part of him that always wondered what had happened to her. Had she returned to her people? Had she thought of him at all? One evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of purple and the stars began to appear, Tommel sat on the porch of his small home, sipping from a mug of tea. He looked out over the land he had come to love, the rows of crops stretching out into the distance. The evening was calm, and for a moment he felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. He had made a life here, a quiet, simple life. But as he sat there, a feeling he couldn't explain washed over him. It was as if something was calling to him, something far away, something from a time and place he had long since left behind. He stared up at the stars, his thoughts drifting. For a brief moment, he imagined Raiva, what she was doing, where she was. Was she still out there in the galaxy, living her life? Had she forgotten him? Tommel stood up from the porch and walked to the small garden near his house. He knelt down, pulling weeds from between the rows of vegetables. But his thoughts were far from the task at hand. The stars above seemed to grow brighter, as if they were urging him to remember, to keep looking, to search for something he wasn't sure he would ever find. And that's when he saw it. A faint glimmer of light on the horizon, moving slowly across the sky. A ship. It was distant, far away, but there was something about it that caught his attention. The light didn't flicker like a normal star. It was too steady, too purposeful. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could it be her? But as quickly as the thought had appeared, it vanished. It was probably just another passing ship on its way to somewhere else. Yet something in him, the part of him that had never fully let go of Rava, urged him to watch, to wait. The ship disappeared over the horizon, but the feeling remained. Maybe one day, Tommel muttered under his breath. Maybe one day, I'll know. And with that he returned to his work, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. But in his heart, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, that somehow their paths would cross again. The years passed, and Rava became a figure of power and respect among the Zerellans. She rose through their ranks quickly, her intelligence and strategic mind earning her the admiration of her people. Yet, despite her success, there was a quiet emptiness within her. A part of her, a memory refused to fade, no matter how hard she tried. The memory of Tommel. It had been years since that fateful day on Velkaris. Since then, Rava had returned to her people, fighting in battles, commanding fleets, and securing victories for the Zerellan Empire. But none of those achievements filled the void that Tommel had left behind. The human scout who had saved her life, who had shown her a kindness that she had never expected from a species so different from her own. His face often appeared in her dreams, his voice echoing in her mind when she least expected it. At first, she had thought it was a passing feeling, something that would fade with time. But it didn't. The more she tried to bury it, the stronger it became. Rava found herself often gazing at the stars, wondering where Tommel was, what he was doing. She had left Earth behind, but Earth had not left her. She knew better than to show such weakness. Zerellans were taught to suppress emotion, to think with logic, not with the heart. In her world, showing affection for another species was unheard of, even dangerous. Yet there was a part of Rava that couldn't let go of the connection she had felt with Tommel. It was something deep, something rare. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something more. A bond that had formed in the silence between words, in the quiet moments when they had simply existed together. But Rava was a warrior, and warriors didn't dwell on such things. She focused on her duties. She commanded fleets with precision, crushed rebellions with ease, and earned the respect of the highest-ranking officials in the Zerellan Empire. Yet, even in the midst of her victories, the weight of her feelings for Tommel never fully lifted. One night, in the quiet of her private quarters aboard her flagship, Rava sat alone at her desk, staring at a star chart of the galaxy. The symbol of Earth blinked on the map, small, distant, and almost forgotten in the vastness of the universe. She had kept track of Earth's progress, its rise from war-torn ashes to a peaceful world. It had become a beacon of hope, of unity, in a galaxy that often seemed consumed by conflict. But what of Tommel? What had happened to him? Did he still remember her? Or had time erased her from his mind, just as she had tried to erase him from hers? She couldn't stop herself. Without thinking, she reached for a small device on her desk, one that was used for secret communication. It was risky, dangerous, even. Zerellan law strictly forbade contact with other species without official permission. But Rava's curiosity and longing overpowered her caution. She activated the device, her fingers trembling as she inputted the coordinates for Earth. The screen flickered for a moment, then displayed a list of names. She scanned the list quickly, searching for the one name she had longed to see: Tommel. His name appeared, listed under a farming colony on Earth's southern continent. Her heart skipped a beat. She had found him. Rava's mind raced. It was a simple thing, really. She could travel to Earth. No one would know. She could see him, speak to him, perhaps even explain the bond she felt. the unspoken connection that had never faded. But the risks were high. If she were discovered, if the Zerellan Empire found out that she had broken the law, it could mean her career, her freedom, would be lost. But there was a deeper question gnawing at her. What if he didn't remember her? What if time had truly erased their brief encounter, and she was simply a distant memory to him, a name he would never recall? Still, Reva couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she needed to do. For years, she had tried to push aside her thoughts of Tommel, but the truth was, she had never truly let him go. She had to know. She had to see him again. She deactivated the device, her decision made. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if Tommel would even recognize her or if he had moved on with his life. But one thing was certain, she would go to Earth, and she would find him, no matter the cost. And so Reva prepared for the journey. The quiet emptiness that had followed her for years would soon be filled with answers, whether they were what she hoped for or whether they would shatter the fragile hope she had clung to for so long. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless stars and endless worlds. Yet, on one of those distant worlds, on a ship that soared through the quiet dark, Reva sat at the helm of her small vessel, staring out into the void. Her mission was clear, yet the path she had chosen felt anything but certain. She had always been a woman of logic, a Zerellan officer who had risen to the highest ranks through her dedication to her people. But this journey, this mission, was something else. It was not sanctioned. It was not part of any military directive. It was a decision born of something deeper, something that had grown inside her ever since the day she had met Tommel on Velkaris. She had spent years buried in her work, commanding fleets, winning battles, and earning the respect of her people. But each time she closed her eyes, the memory of Tommel would resurface. She could still see his face, still hear his voice, soft and reassuring. His touch, as he helped her when she was weak and vulnerable, had left an indelible mark on her heart. No matter how much she tried to ignore it, the feeling never faded. It had been years, but Reva couldn't let go. And so, she had made a choice that could cost her everything. Reva knew the risks. Zerellans were not allowed to form bonds with other species. It was forbidden. Her people were proud, and alliances with other races were seen as weakness. Her own people would never understand why she had disobeyed the laws, why she had broken the rules for something so personal. But Reva had come to realize that it wasn't just a memory she sought. It was a connection that was stronger than anything she had ever experienced. As her ship cruised through the stars, Reva thought about the consequences. She had already made her decision. There was no turning back now. If she were caught, it would be the end of her career. She might even lose her freedom. The Zerellan Empire valued order and obedience above all else. They did not tolerate defiance, but, despite the risks, Reva's resolve remained unshaken. She had to find Tommel. She had to see him again. Her ship passed through the boundaries of Zerellan space, moving closer to the distant planet Earth, the planet where Tommel had lived. Reva's heart beat faster as the familiar blue and green planet came into view. She hadn't realized how badly she needed to see Earth, to be close to the place that had once felt like a distant dream. Earth had changed in the years since the war ended. It was a world of peace now, a place where the scars of the past were slowly healing. But Reva wasn't here for the planet. She was here for Tommel. Her mind raced as she approached the atmosphere. She had to be careful. Earth's defenses were strong, and her ship was not a diplomatic vessel. If she were detected, it would not be long before the authorities took action. Reva had planned every detail of her journey, from the route she would take to the way she would land. She had made sure her arrival would go unnoticed. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. As the ship descended, Reva's thoughts drifted back to that day on Velkaris. She remembered the way Tommel had looked at her, how different he was from the other humans she had encountered. There had been no fear in his eyes, no hatred or suspicion, just kindness. And that kindness had made something in her stir. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, not in the way she felt it with him. She thought about their brief time together, how it had felt like a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of things, but it had been so much more than that. Tommel had left a mark on her soul, one she couldn't erase. The ship touched down quietly on the outskirts of a farming colony. Rava didn't know exactly where to find him, but she had a name, Tommel, and a rough location. She would find him no matter what. It wasn't just about the past, it was about the future, about the connection they had shared. The unspoken bond that had formed between them in the quiet of war, a bond that neither time nor distance had been able to break. Rava stood up, taking a deep breath as she prepared to leave the ship. She had made it this far. Now she would find the answers she sought, no matter what they were, no matter what it cost her. With one last glance at her ship, Rava stepped into the unknown, her heart racing with anticipation. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer running from her feelings, she was running toward them, and perhaps toward a future she never expected. The air was crisp as Rava stepped out of her ship, her boots crunching on the gravel of the small path leading into the farming colony. Earth felt different than she had imagined, warmer, more alive. The sky was a soft shade of blue. The fields around her stretched for miles, full of green crops and the occasional animal grazing peacefully. She paused for a moment, taking in the simplicity of it all. It was a stark contrast to the harshness of the galaxy she had known. The battles, the endless politics, the coldness of her people. Here there was peace. But that peace felt strange to her now. It felt incomplete, as though something was missing. Tommel was missing. Rava shook her head, pushing those thoughts aside. She had made her decision to come here, and she wasn't going to turn back. She had a purpose now, a goal she had set for herself. She had to find him, no matter how much time had passed, no matter how much she feared the possibility that he might have forgotten her. She pulled up the coordinates she had received from the Earth database, marking the location of the farming colony where Tommel had settled after the war. The village was small, nothing like the cities she had seen on Zirella or the bustling spaceports she had traveled through. But that didn't matter. She would find him here. The village was quiet. A few people moved about their daily tasks, harvesting crops, tending to animals, and walking from one building to another. Rava's presence was clearly noticed. The locals watched her curiously as she passed, but no one approached her. They must have sensed that she wasn't just another traveler. Rava kept her head down, trying to appear as unthreatening as possible. She didn't need attention. She needed information. She stopped by a small market stall where an older woman was selling fresh fruit. Rava approached cautiously, trying to sound casual. "Excuse me," Rava said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm looking for someone, a man named Tommel. Do you know where I can find him?" The woman looked at Rava for a long moment, her eyes scanning the stranger carefully. There was a pause before she finally spoke, her voice low and cautious. "Tommel? The farmer. He lives on the outskirts of the village, in a small house near the east fields. But you'd best be careful with him. He's a quiet one. Keeps to himself mostly." Rava nodded, her heart racing. She had found him. Now she just needed to find the courage to meet him again after so many years. "Thank you," Rava said, turning away quickly. She didn't want to delay any longer. She had no idea how Tommel would react to seeing her. Would he even remember her? Or had time erased their brief connection completely? The walk to his home was short, but filled with anticipation. Rava couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him over the years. Had he found peace here, as she had heard from the woman at the market? Had he built a new life for himself, forgetting the past? Finally, she reached the small house on the edge of the village, nestled between rows of crops. It was a simple, modest home, much like the rest of the village, but it felt right. It felt like the place Tommel would have chosen, a place where he could be alone, away from the chaos of the war. Reva stood in front of the door for a moment, her hand hovering over the handle. She could hear the sounds of the land around her, the rustling of the leaves in the wind, the chirp of birds overhead, the distant call of an animal. But her thoughts were focused entirely on the door in front of her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what might happen next. Taking a deep breath, Reva knocked lightly on the door. For a long moment there was silence. Reva's heart pounded in her chest, and she tried to calm her racing thoughts. What if he didn't recognize her? What if he had moved on from that day, from everything they had shared? But then the door opened, and there he was, Tommel. For a moment they both stood there in silence, staring at each other. The years melted away in that instant. Reva could see the same eyes she remembered, the same quiet strength in his gaze. He looked different, older perhaps and weathered by time, but it was still him. Reva, Tommel said, his voice a soft whisper, almost like he couldn't believe it. Is it really you? Reva nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had never expected this moment to feel so overwhelming. So much had changed in the years since they last met, but the connection between them felt as strong as ever. I didn't know if you would remember me, Reva said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tommel stepped forward, his eyes searching her face. How could I forget? The words hung in the air between them, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had never truly faded. Reva felt something inside her shift, something she had been carrying for years now finally easing. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time in a long time she felt a sense of hope. The air was crisp as Reva stepped out of her ship, her boots crunching on the gravel of the small path leading into the farming colony. Earth felt different than she had imagined, warmer, more alive. The sky was a soft shade of blue, the fields around her stretched for miles, full of green crops and the occasional animal grazing peacefully. She paused for a moment, taking in the simplicity of it all. It was a stark contrast to the harshness of the galaxy she had known. The battles, the endless politics, the coldness of her people. Here there was peace, but that peace felt strange to her now. It felt incomplete, as though something was missing. Tommel was missing. Reva shook her head, pushing those thoughts aside. She had made her decision to come here, and she wasn't going to turn back. She had a purpose now, a goal she had set for herself. She had to find him, no matter how much time had passed, no matter how much she feared the possibility that he might have forgotten her. She pulled up the coordinates she had received from the Earth database, marking the location of the farming colony where Tommel had settled after the war. The village was small, nothing like the cities she had seen on Zirella or the bustling spaceports she had traveled through. But that didn't matter. She would find him here. The village was quiet. A few people moved about their daily tasks, harvesting crops, tending to animals, and walking from one building to another. Reva's presence was clearly noticed. The locals watched her curiously as she passed, but no one approached her. They must have sensed that she wasn't just another traveler. Reva kept her head down, trying to appear as unthreatening as possible. She didn't need attention. She needed information. She stopped by a small market stall where an older woman was selling fresh fruit. Reva approached cautiously, trying to sound casual. "Excuse me," Reva said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm looking for someone, a man named Tommel. Do you know where I can find him?" The woman looked at Raver for a long moment, her eyes scanning the stranger carefully. There was a pause before she finally spoke, her voice low and cautious. "Tommel? The farmer. He lives on the outskirts of the village, in a small house near the east fields, but you'd best be careful with him. He's a quiet one. Keeps to himself mostly." Raver nodded, her heart racing. She had found him. Now she just needed to find the courage to meet him again after so many years. "Thank you," Raver said, turning away quickly. She didn't want to delay any longer. She had no idea how Tommel would react to seeing her. Would he even remember her? Or had time erased their brief connection completely? The walk to his home was short, but filled with anticipation. Raver couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him over the years. Had he found peace here, as she had heard from the woman at the market? Had he built a new life for himself, forgetting the past? Finally, she reached the small house on the edge of the village, nestled between rows of crops. It was a simple, modest home, much like the rest of the village, but it felt right. It felt like the place Tommel would have chosen, a place where he could be alone, away from the chaos of the war. Raver stood in front of the door for a moment, her hand hovering over the handle. She could hear the sounds of the land around her, the rustling of the leaves in the wind, the chirp of birds overhead, the distant call of an animal. But her thoughts were focused entirely on the door in front of her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what might happen next. Taking a deep breath, Raver knocked lightly on the door. For a long moment there was silence. Raver's heart pounded in her chest, and she tried to calm her racing thoughts. What if he didn't recognize her? What if he had moved on from that day, from everything they had shared? But then the door opened, and there he was, Tommel. For a moment they both stood there in silence, staring at each other. The years melted away in that instant. Raver could see the same eyes she remembered, the same quiet strength in his gaze. He looked different, older perhaps and weathered by time, but it was still him. "Raver," Tommel said, his voice a soft whisper, almost like he couldn't believe it. "Is it really you?" Raver nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had never expected this moment to feel so overwhelming. So much had changed in the years since they last met, but the connection between them felt as strong as ever. "I didn't know if you would remember me," Raver said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tommel stepped forward, his eyes searching her face. "How could I forget?" The words hung in the air between them, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had never truly faded. Raver felt something inside her shift, something she had been carrying for years now finally easing. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time in a long time she felt a sense of hope. The days following Raver's return to Tommel's home passed in a quiet rhythm, as if time itself had slowed down to match the pace of life on Earth. Tommel had shown her the land he had come to love, the vast fields that stretched out before him, the small animals he cared for, and the peaceful community he had become a part of. Raver had spent most of her time walking with him through the fields, learning about the world he now called home. There was something strangely comforting about the simplicity of his life. The days were predictable, the nights calm, and the people kind. Raver had spent so many years in the chaos of war and duty, never truly understanding the peace that could exist in a place like this. But here, with Tommel, it felt like everything had finally slowed down. One afternoon, after a long day of work, they sat together on the porch of Tommel's house, watching the sun set behind the rolling hills. The sky turned a soft shade of orange, the clouds reflecting the last rays of the day's light. Raver had come to enjoy these moments, sitting in quiet companionship, knowing that neither of them needed to say anything to feel understood. "I never thought I would find peace like this," Reva said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I spent so many years fighting for something I didn't fully understand. I thought it was duty that kept me going. But now, I see it's not enough. It never was. Tommel turned to her, his eyes gentle. You're not the only one. I thought, after the war, that I could forget everything, that I could start over. But no matter how hard I tried, the past always lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something I had left behind. Reva met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. She had never felt more at ease than she did right now, with Tommel. The war, the Empire, all of it seemed like distant memories in the face of what they had here. But the question remained, what was next for them? I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, Reva admitted, her eyes focused on the ground. I came here to find you, but I never thought about what would happen after. I never thought about the choices I would have to make. Tommel studied her closely, his expression thoughtful. You have a choice, Reva. You can stay here with me if that's what you want. Or you can go back to the stars, to your people. You're free to choose. The simplicity of his words hit Reva like a wave. She had spent so much of her life following orders, never allowing herself to choose her own path. But now, the choice was hers, and it terrified her. Do you really think I could stay? Reva asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tommel smiled softly, his eyes warm. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that if you want to stay, you're welcome here. This life, it's not perfect, but it's real, and it's ours if you want it. The words hung in the air between them, and Reva felt her heart beat faster. She had always known that her life had been guided by a sense of duty, by a need to fulfill the expectations of others. But now, for the first time in a long time, she found herself wondering what it would be like to choose for herself. To live for herself, and not for the Empire or anyone else. She looked out over the horizon, where the last light of the day was fading into the night. The stars were beginning to twinkle above them, each one a distant reminder of the vastness of the universe. Reva had seen so many worlds, met so many people, and fought so many battles. But none of it had ever felt as real as this moment. Tommel's voice broke the silence again, soft but certain. You don't have to decide anything right now. Take your time. Reva nodded slowly, her mind racing with possibilities. She had come here with one purpose, to find him. But now, she was faced with a choice she had never anticipated. A choice that could change everything. For so long, she had lived for the future, for the promise of victory, for the glory of her people. But now, for the first time, Reva was considering something different. A life without the constant pressure of duty, a life where she could choose what came next. Could she truly leave everything behind? Could she live in peace with Tommel, away from the demands of the galaxy? The thought was both terrifying and liberating. Reva wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that whatever she decided, it would be her choice, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and Reva continued to stay with Tommel, growing more accustomed to the quiet rhythms of his life. The mornings began early, with the sun rising over the fields, and the days were filled with simple tasks. They worked together, planting, harvesting, and caring for the animals, sharing moments of silence that felt more comfortable than any conversation. But as the days passed, Reva couldn't shake the feeling that a decision loomed over her. Tommel had given her the choice to stay, but the weight of that choice felt heavier with every passing day. Could she truly leave everything behind? Could she build a life here, away from the Empire, away from the universe that had shaped her existence for so long? Tommel had been patient, never pushing her to make a decision before she was ready. He had shown her the peaceful life he had created here, far from the chaos of war and the endless demands of leadership. But Raver's mind was still tangled with doubt. She had spent so many years living by duty, by orders, by what others expected of her. It was difficult to imagine a life where her only responsibility was to herself, to the life she wanted to create. One afternoon, as the two of them walked through the fields, Raver's thoughts began to swirl again. The wind blew softly around them, carrying the scent of fresh earth and the sound of distant birds. Raver looked at Tommel, who was walking beside her, his face peaceful, content. "Tommel," she began, her voice hesitant, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had never met? If we had never crossed paths that day?" Tommel slowed his pace, turning to face her. "I think about it sometimes, but honestly, I don't regret it. Meeting you, it changed everything for me." He smiled gently. "I wasn't sure where my life was headed. But when I saw you, something in me knew that I had to hold on to that moment, to that connection." Raver nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I feel the same way. I thought I could leave it all behind, but now I'm not so sure." Tommel placed a hand gently on her shoulder, a gesture that felt both comforting and reassuring. "You don't have to rush, Raver. Whatever decision you make, it will be the right one. But don't carry the weight of the past with you. Let yourself think about what you want, what will make you happy." Raver took a deep breath, feeling the weight in her chest lift slightly. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of the galaxy, of her people, of the expectations placed on her. But here, with Tommel, she could breathe, she could think, and she could finally consider a future that was hers alone. That night, after a quiet dinner, Raver sat outside, gazing at the stars above. They seemed so much brighter here, away from the pollution and lights of the cities she was used to. The universe stretched out before her, vast and infinite. She had traveled to so many places, seen so many things, but none of it had ever felt as important as this moment, sitting under the stars, alone with her thoughts. What did she want? Raver had always been taught that her purpose was to serve her people, to fight for their future, to bring glory to the Zarellan Empire. But now, as she looked at the quiet beauty of the world around her, she realized that perhaps there was more to life than duty. Maybe there was a different path she could follow, a path where she could find peace, where she could care for herself as much as she cared for others. As the stars twinkled above, Raver made a decision. It wasn't an easy one, but it was the one she knew she had to make. The next morning she found Tommel outside, working near the fields. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and gave her a small smile. Raver walked up to him, her heart steady, her mind clear. "Tommel," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I've thought about it and I've made my decision." Tommel paused, his expression waiting, open. "I want to stay. I want to build a life here with you," Raver said, the words finally flowing from her lips. "I don't want to keep living in the shadow of my past. I want to choose something different, something that's just mine, and I want that to be with you." Tommel's face softened, and his eyes brightened with something that looked like relief, maybe even joy. "Raver," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "are you sure?" Raver nodded, her eyes steady. "I'm sure." For the first time in a long time, Raver felt at peace. She had made her choice, and it felt right. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she knew that whatever came next, it was something she had chosen for herself. She wasn't bound by duty anymore. She was free to live the life she wanted, and with Tommel by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed Raver's decision were filled with a quiet excitement, a sense of anticipation that grew with each passing sunrise. Tommel and Rava worked side by side in the fields, but now there was something different in the air. Shared understanding, a new chapter in both of their lives. For the first time in years, Rava didn't feel like she was simply existing. She was living. The community that Tommel had become a part of welcomed Rava with open arms. She had always kept to herself, carrying the weight of her past with her. But here, in this quiet village, surrounded by people who had no expectations of her except to be herself, she found a sense of belonging she never thought possible. As she spent more time with the villagers, she began to see the world differently. The simple joys of daily life, working the land, sharing meals with others, helping those in need, became something she cherished. She had once believed that greatness lay in grand achievements, in battles won, and in the praise of others. But now she realized that true greatness could be found in the smallest of acts, helping someone in need, offering a kind word, or simply spending time with the people who mattered most. Tommel had shown her this world, this peaceful existence, but it was Rava who had to embrace it. And slowly, she did. One evening, after finishing a long day of work, Rava found herself sitting on the porch once again, staring at the setting sun. The sky was a beautiful mix of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the land. Tommel sat beside her, his presence steady and comforting. The air was cool, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees around them. "Do you ever miss it?" Rava asked softly, not looking at him, but at the horizon. "Do you ever miss the stars, the other worlds, the excitement?" Tommel took a moment before answering, his gaze following hers to the vast sky. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "but I've come to realize that it's not the excitement or the battles that matter. It's the peace, the feeling of being here, with people who care about you. That's the kind of life I've always wanted." Rava nodded slowly, her heart heavy with understanding. She had spent so many years chasing the thrill of war, the rush of victory, the feeling of being in control. But now, she understood. The real joy was in the quiet moments, the ones that allowed her to simply be. "I think I'm starting to understand that," Rava said, her voice filled with a sense of peace. "I don't need to be a warrior anymore. I don't need to prove anything. I just want to live." Tommel smiled, his hand gently resting on hers. "You've always had that strength within you, Rava. It was just buried under all the expectations and the battles. Now, you're free to be yourself." Rava smiled back, the weight in her chest lifting. She had spent so long fighting for a future she never truly understood. Now, she had found a future that felt right. It wasn't about the empire, the battles, or the recognition. It was about the quiet moments, the everyday life she was building with Tommel and the people around her. That evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Rava realized that she had finally come home. Not just to Tommel, but to herself. She had spent so much time searching for a place to belong, for a purpose. But now, in this quiet village, surrounded by the simple beauty of life, Rava knew she had found it. She wasn't the warrior the universe had once known. She wasn't the soldier who had fought for the future of her people. Now she was something more. She was a person who had learned to live, to love, and to find peace. And as she looked at Tommel, she knew that together they would continue to build a life that was filled with purpose, a life that was all their own. For the first time in a long time, Rava felt truly at peace. She had made the right choice. And she had found something more important than any victory. She had found her place in the world.